economic turmoil.
There's no way the US 10-year note should move 0.5% in a day, let alone 28%.
Plagues.
We have just passed the tragic milestone of 4 million recorded COVID-19 deaths.
Insecurity.
What are some of the biggest reasons people are concerned right now about their financial well-being?
Right now is really a sensitive time for so many people because they have their emergency funds have been tested, and it makes all of this financial security and financial planning seem really real right now.
These are the ingredients to a societal state vulnerable to instability, bigotry, and violence. A societal state where the people are liable to have their anxieties funneled into a dangerous mistrust of their fellow man. Where previously amiable neighbors are pitted against each other because of politics, surface-level characteristics, supposed moral failings, or because of exposure to a sickness. A sickness which is poorly understood by the common citizen, spreading its way through the population at a rate which, to people living in this society, seems terrifying. In times when these conditions are met, when these ingredients are mixed, violent action is often not far behind. And these conditions were met in the Kingdom of France in the year 1321 of the Common Era. But first, some background. Leading up to the year 1321, a lot of farmers, which constituted the majority of the people in the Kingdom of France at the time, were struggling through the aftermath of a great famine which had left their pantries empty and their pockets just the same. Then, when a lot of farm animals started dying, possibly due to that same grain shortage or because of an illness spreading, the situation got even more dire. The people were dissatisfied, a state that the noblemen, clergy, and merchants in charge knew very well tended to manifest in revolts and uprisings. It was very lucky for those people in the ruling class then, when a rumor started spreading in southern France. A rumor that put the blame for the recent troubles squarely on the shoulders of a group already ostracized by society. A group already looked at with suspicion and derision. A group which the ruling class only too happily maneuvered into the metaphorical crosshairs of popular outrage. Lepers. First off, a brief explainer for lepers. Leper is a now outdated term describing people suffering from leprosy. What modern medicine calls leprosy, or Hansen's disease, is an ailment afflicting people infected by the Mycobacterium leprae. It causes neurological damage, which can lead all the way to the inability to feel pain in some areas. Where the skin is affected, the body is covered in poorly pigmented blotches, which are largely considered unpleasant to look at. The medieval understanding of leprosy, however, was not nearly as developed as ours. Medieval people used the term to describe a variety of illnesses resulting in blotchy discolorations or lesions on the skin. Because of their unpleasant appearance, and because of some biblical mistranslation which conflated the condition of leprosy with another skin-affecting illness that the Bible judged a sign of impurity, lepers found themselves ostracized in medieval society. They were often segregated from general society, sequestered in so-called leper colonies or leprosaria, singular leprosarium. And so medieval lepers found themselves in a position incredibly suited for getting blamed. Bangarang. So it came to be that rumors began to spread that a large part of the trouble the people of the Kingdom of France were facing was actually according to the design of the lepers. As is the way of such things, who started this rumor, when and why, cannot be said for certain. All we know is that it spread from the south of France until it was believed in the entire kingdom. Years later, Bernard Guy, Inquisitor in Toulouse from 1307 to 1324, would write: In 1321 there was detected and prevented an evil plan of the lepers against the healthy persons in the Kingdom of France. Indeed, plotting against the safety of the people, these persons, unhealthy in body and insane in mind, had arranged to infect the waters of the rivers and fountains and wells everywhere by placing poison and infected matter in them, and by mixing into the water prepared powders, so that healthy men drinking from them or using the water thus infected would become lepers or die or almost die, and thus the number of lepers would be increased and the healthy decreased. And what seems incredible to say, they aspired to the lordship of towns and castles, and had already divided among themselves the lordship of places, and given themselves the name of potentate, grand, or baron in various lands, if what they planned should come about. By the time the clergy started paying attention to this supposed plot, the situation was already tense. People were just about ready to start taking justice into their own hands, a dangerous proposition to church and state leadership, who would rather be in control of the justice that was to meet the supposed conspirators. And so, both the Catholic Church's Inquisition, as well as the landed counts, barons and dukes of France, started arresting the leaders of leprosaria all around the kingdom. One such leader was Guillaume Agasse, who was arrested by the Inquisition and brought before a representative of Jacques Fournier, the Bishop of Pamiers, who would later go on to become Pope Benedict XII. Aside from a horrific torturer who was prepared to do anything to get a confession from his prisoners, Fournier was also a diligent keeper of records, which is why we know a lot about the progression of the so-called trial of Guillaume Agasse. In his first confession, Agasse spoke of two lepers, called basically Frenchy McNormandy and Fernando from Spain, or rather Guillaume Normand and Ferdinand Espagnol, who had gone to Toulouse to acquire poison. Upon returning to Agasse's colony, the men bragged about how they were going to poison waters in Pamiers. When asked if he had tried to prevent the poisoning, Agasse replied that he had not, and that he had in fact enjoyed the thought. After 7 days of further torture, Agasse appeared once more before the representatives of the future Pope. The story he told this time was markedly different from what he had told previously. While both confessions were obviously untruthful and forced on pain of, well, pain, the way his story changes between his confessions tells us a lot of what his captors believed, perhaps even wanted, to be true. This time, he spoke of a mysterious letter he had received, inviting him to Toulouse to conduct and order certain things which would result to his advantage and honor. Once there, Agasse and a fellow leper he met along the way would participate in a meeting with 40 other lepers, many of them leaders of their respective leprosaria. There, their host addressed them, appealing to the unjust ways Christians treated them, how they would treat them with no respect and segregate them from proper society. Because of this, the lepers supposedly planned to further spread leprosy in France, until the lepers were in a position to take over rule from the Christians. I find it very interesting how lepers are being framed here as contrasting Christians, already setting up what would soon follow in the further course of the forced confession. Because not only had the lepers allegedly made enemies of all Christians, they also relied on help from the King of Granada, a Muslim, and thus implied a natural villain to the Catholic French. Granada, at the time, was one of the last Muslim states left in Iberia, the Reconquista not having fully succeeded yet. Implying that the lepers were receiving assistance from a hated enemy abroad would only further the ruling class's goal of othering, casting lepers in the role of the source of society's woes. To aid the lepers, the king was supposedly providing them with funds and poisons. At the end of his second testimony, Agasse directly implicated himself in the spreading of poisonous powders to the water sources of healthy French communities, refuting his earlier claim that he had merely watched and enjoyed it. Almost a month later, Agasse would make a final confession, this time before Jacques Fournier, the future pope, himself. He stated, for the record, that he had been tortured on the day of his first confession, but not since, before launching into his third testimony. His story was similar to his second one, but noticeably embellished to be more threatening. This time, the number of lepers attending the meeting increased from 40 to 60, and had come from all over France instead of mainly southern areas. Once more, the sinister plot was revealed to the attendees, this time in the presence of a man dressed in all black, standing ready with a halberd to decapitate anybody who questioned what was being proposed. The number of outside enemies supporting the plot had also increased, the King of Granada now being joined by the Sultan of Babylon. That last bit is interesting, given that Babylon was just another city in the Ilkhanate at the time, which was one of the many successor states of Genghis Khan's great horde. It was blatantly just a mention added because it sounded nefarious, foreign and Muslim. As part of the plotting, the lepers present were allegedly required to deny Christ and his laws, spit on a cross and agree to pay fealty to the Muslim rulers once they had replaced the Christian ones on their thrones. Agasse again admitted to having received poisonous powder, one of the ingredients of which was supposedly the body of Christ, and distributing it in water sources around France. He rescinded all his accusations of other lepers in his first deposition, taking the crimes upon himself this time. One of the two, though, had been burnt to death in the meantime anyway. Wait a second, does this mean Norman MacNormandy and Ferdinand of Spain were real people? Apparently. Anyway, for his supposed crime, Agasse was sentenced to perpetual imprisonment. Looking at other parts of France, he had gotten off lightly. Lepers were being subjected to horrific ways to die, being tarred, dismembered, drawn and quartered all over France. The king had gotten wind of the conspiracy and decided that all lepers found implicated in it had committed lèse majesté. The dukes, counts, bishops and cardinals went to work eagerly, sentencing and killing lepers left and right. They did disagree with the king, however, but it was about the charge, because lèse majesté was a crime against the monarchy, meaning lowlier rulers would not be able to take the possessions of the guilty for themselves. This is a great example of the common medieval power struggles between the king up top and the dukes and counts swearing fealty to him. Another power struggle with relevance to this is found in the story of the Bishop of Dax and the Sire d'Albret. The Sire, or Lord, of Albret had accused a leper of an unspecified crime and burned him over it. This made the Bishop of Dax fear over his jurisdiction over the leprosarium. A power struggle ensued before the court, involving representatives from dukes, the king, and even the Pope himself. In an effort to preserve his jurisdiction over the leprosarium, the bishop arrested all of the lepers in his diocese himself. It came to pass that communes around the south of France petitioned the monarchy to expel the Jews from France. That came a bit out of nowhere, but I'll explain their involvement later. To once again segregate all the lepers by royal decree. The petitioners declared themselves selflessly prepared to administer all the wealth of the arrested lepers. And this is important to the power struggle, to rein in his royal officials who were claiming jurisdiction because of the supposed charge of lèse-majesté over trials which they had, legally speaking, no business presiding over. They should have been heard by the local courts. These same officers were then, unjustly, inquiring about crimes of usury against the Christians there. A crime which, once again, the local courts should have been dealing with, and which, rather uncomfortably, implied a power grab by the monarchy. It seems only fair that since we spent some time talking about a confession solicited by a clerical official, we should also talk about a deposition conducted by worldly forces. Officials from the town of Régalville in France took the confession of the leper Johan de Bosco. Johan was from the city of Alterque and appeared before the officials free of all chains according to the protocol, and stated on oath that 3 weeks earlier the leader of the leprosarium of Alterque had brought 2 bags full of powder and ordered Johan to put this powder in the water sources around him. It was told to him, Johan confessed, that the powder would be making anybody who drank of the water leprous. And Johan was busy because the leader actually gave him payment and expenses for the task. And the rest of the confession is just a list of dozens of villages Johan claimed to have visited and poisoned the water in each. By way of thanks for the very convenient to the narrative confession Johan had given, he was sentenced to the merciful death by burning. The story of his deposition was spread throughout the region and helped kickstart official municipal violence against lepers. And the lepers were not the only ones suffering. At some point in the spread of the conspiracy, as is the way of such things, another group of people who often found themselves victims of bigotry in medieval Europe got implicated. The Jews. Having just been granted return to the Kingdom of France in 1315, after they were expelled for 9 years from 1306 on, the Jews quickly found themselves victims of violence yet again. They were thought to have a deep-seated animosity towards the Christians, which led, supposedly, the wealthy and more influential of their ranks to supply the lepers with capital and support for their plot. Or so the popular story went. And so the Jews too found themselves victims of extrajudicial and completely legal burnings, punishments, and similar. Pogroms against the Jews were held across the kingdom once more. A popular story at the time spoke of 40 imprisoned Jews who had decided to resort to suicide rather than be subjected to the justice of the Christians. The oldest of the group was selected to take the life from the rest of them, but he was weak and needed assistance, which was provided by a much younger Jew. After the gruesome work was done, the older Jew demanded his life be ended first among the two remaining, a request that the younger one granted. The story then purports that the survivor looted the bodies for all their gold, silver, and jewelry and made ropes from their clothing. As he climbed from the cell window, he realized too late that his rope was much too short and fell high enough to break his legs, when he was promptly recaptured to face justice, after all. A blatantly ridiculous story, almost as overt a moral tale as Aesop's fables themselves, meant to portray the Jews as cartoonishly greedy and deceptive, it falls apart at even the most cursory critical examination. After all, the Jews in the cell would have been relieved of all their valuables by their Christian captors long before any of their own would have had a chance to. As ridiculous as it was, the spread of the story shows well the prevailing attitudes towards adherents of the Jewish faith at that time. After a few years of widespread violence towards Jews, lepers, and Muslims for their supposed plotting against all of Christendom, the story and its consequences started to die down. Like an infection burning through the fabric of French and also Northern Christian Spanish society, it seemingly died down after running out of healthy tissue to infect. Having left possibly multiple thousands of bodies behind, the moral panic had run its course. A popular story, a deadly meme, spreading through a society and demanding a deadly price. The story of the leper's plot was over. Learning of this decade of conspiracies was fascinating for me. I think it's easy to see why. Fabricated stories, a deadly plague, an outside political enemy implicated, and the rich profiting from the exploited as the poor turn against each other. It seems impossible not to see parallels to our own society in this turbulent modern day. Let us hope that our conspiratorial stories die down before the bodies start dropping. Or, at least, before many more of them do. Thank you very much for watching this video, and an extra special thank you to my loyal patrons Rayo and Sosa, who supported me even through the months-long hiatus which I had, sadly, to take because of real-life stuff. I am very anxious and curious to see how this video will be received, given that it was my first attempt at more serious historical videos, rather than just memes translated into medieval language. I would like, at this point, to point out two sources I have used in researching this. The first is called Lepers, Jews and Muslims, the plot to overthrow Christendom in 1321, by Malcolm Barber. The second is called Communities of Violence, Persecution of Minorities in the Middle Ages, by David Nirenberg. of which chapters 2 and 4 are of particular relevance to the Leper's plot. Thank you very much for watching. Do remember to leave your feedback in the form of a like, a dislike, a comment, and if you find it fitting, subscribing and hitting the bell or joining the realm on Twitter or Discord. Links in the description. Thank you once again, and I'll see you around.